Werewolf The Apocalypse, Earthblood. A single player RPG where you get to shred up your foes in Northwest America. Now this is exciting. I've been waiting for a werewolf game for a while now, and more recently I've played Maneater, which is an open world shark game which was a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend a purchase if you haven't already played it. So the idea of tearing it up on land is pretty tantalizing. Now, this isn't an open world like Maneater, but there are large hub areas which allow exploration and secondary missions, which also influence the story, which is pretty cool. This game's on PC, PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One and Xbox Series X. Cyanide, a French studio involved in multiple projects that I've personally played, so I'm going to put that on screen now. They have a long list of games. I love the Blood Bowl series, and I'm also a big fan of Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. So I was excited to see what they would bring to the table with Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood. Now without further ado, here is the review. Enjoy. Recently I had a catch up with a friend, and I told her I was doing the review for the Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood, and she literally responded with, "Is that the game that looks like it was made in the late 90s, early 2000s? I chuckled as that was true. For some reason this game reminds me of those action games from the late 90s and early 2000s, both in its gameplay and its visual look. It's definitely been a while since I've seen such active eyebrows on such an inactive face. It reminds me of this clip." The facial animations on the characters are pretty hilarious. It's almost as if the main character was the only one who got any attention, although I have to say the fur on the werewolves is actually pretty good. And it's difficult for me to say this as I had high hopes for the game, but maybe the budget just wasn't there. It's hard to become emotionally invested in the characters when all I can think about is their deadpan expressions and their dancing eyebrows. In fact, there were a couple of moments when I knew I was supposed to feel sad, but for the life of me I couldn't provide a reaction just because of their face. Let's talk about level design. At first I didn't notice that the levels had an entirely square design. It dawned on me after watching the AI go around a couple of times. Around these waist-high fences, their movement was so rigid. The movement, the architecture, the feel of the entire level feels square, and almost as if you're moving from one square to another, and this feeling persists even when you go to levels that are bigger later on. It's like someone has just snapped two levels together, or snapped two squares together, and copy and pasted everything in. Natural feeling levels are few and far between, and the best games do it in a way that's so natural you don't even notice half the time. The textures at times can be blurry, and almost jarringly so. It becomes more obvious on objects that are supposed to come across naturally like foliage. When there is a vast difference in environments, these blurry textures become much more noticeable, and at times it's like the texture work wasn't even finished. This is a game of larger scope than what Cyanide is used to, and I'm going to record this down as a teething issue. As they start to expand more into the original world building aspects of video games, this will become easier. Whereas before, leaning on the history of existing IPs like Warhammer and Warhammer 40k made things slightly easier, as there's other media outside of the tabletop which can be used as inspiration during the development process, whereas the Werewolf series has little to no existing media outside of the tabletop, so I'm interested to see how they develop their assets in the coming future. In Werewolf, gameplay is broken down into three parts, which is represented by three forms. You have the regular human form, which is used for talking to NPCs, interacting with objects that are not wolf friendly, or exploring areas that only allow human form. You then have the wolf form, Lupus, which is essentially used for moving around faster, going through small vents, and generally doing wolfy things. Then you have your werewolf form, which is essentially your combat form, and in this form you have access to two sub-forms, Agile and Power, each form offering 4 skills and their unique traits, and you can unlock these by getting spirit points. And how do you get these? Well, you talk to trees, have intimate moments with plants connecting to them on a spiritual level, and you get them as a form of XP. Then you have your final form, which is a berserk form. It strips you of any skills or healing for more power. The skill tree itself isn't too deep, but there are some powerful skills like having a cloak on your wolf that allows you to increase the time before detection. This in itself is a really great skill and you'll be utilizing stealth a lot, trust me. Ever hit anyone with a foam finger or a pillow or anything soft in a video game or otherwise? Well, if you have, that's what the combat in this game feels like. In the 10 to 20 hours that it took to complete the game, I genuinely didn't find a moment where I felt truly powerful, which is what a werewolf is about, right? Incredible speed, ferocious strength, using fang and claw, shredding through anything that stands in your way. I found this very peculiar, as the game's main selling point is its combat, but I don't necessarily think that this is a power level issue. I think the problem stems from animations and how the characters move and react to physical objects. When broken down into frames, you can see that the animations are quite clunky and provide limited visual feedback, which is a pivotal part of any game. The game that does this best in recent memory is Devil May Cry. More specifically, the new DLC character Virgil. Now, anyone who's played Virgil knows he's a very powerful dude, and every move you make feels intentional and impactful. If you're playing on a controller, you can really feel the weight of the moves, which adds a lot of texture to the combat. Now, some of you may say, the studio, Cyanide, is much smaller than Devil May Cry's, which you're right, that is true. But I do think it's good to set a high benchmark when developing games, especially when combat is the main part of it. Often you'll find yourself resorting to stealth, as engaging in combat is an often strenuous affair and it offers no real value. This makes it difficult to recommend, when you could just use your wolf form, run around stealth killing the whole level, with the boss being the only exception. It's such a shame, as I was really hoping to be a powerful werewolf instead of being a puppy with sponges attached to his paws. A missed opportunity is what it is. And here's hoping that Cyanide managed to take the feedback from this game and its reviews and improve on their future titles. The game starts out with a character about to raid an industrial facility of a corporate giant. As you can probably imagine, this corporation is evil, being manipulated by an exterior force called the Worm. It's basically a force of death, which saps the strength from the wild, which is a force of nature. The wild is often portrayed using tree spirits or animals. You fight as a servant of the wild, a werewolf also known as a Garu, who enforces of the wild and its territory. The balance between the two powers is out of whack, and it's your job to restore the balance. However, things don't always go according to plan, and you lose someone. You impose a self-exile in order to atone for the crime you committed in a mission, which I won't spoil. I do like how they've portrayed the battle of nature against corporations, and if you follow the tabletop, you know exactly what to expect. As you go about your business, you'll find small notes which flesh out the story, providing more background on the company Endron and their nefarious ways. As I found myself stopping to read these little notes, quite often they allowed me to form my own narrative when voice acting or poor facial animations failed to immerse me. The rigid environments fail to tell a story, and there isn't much to look at when you actually raid these facilities as you go along the game. They seem so empty, and other than the occasional voice line, there's not much history or contextual story to be given. You go from one facility to another, chasing something, which I won't spoil, but it's fairly predictable route and it's fairly cliched. Now, depending on the side missions that you've completed, you can somewhat change your story ending. Now, again, I'm not going to spoil this, but it is worth doing them just for that extra bit of story. Ultimately though, you are creating your own experiences with what you have available. I'd suggest reading up on the Werewolf tabletop to give you a bit more content to chew through. Let's get this out of the way then. The soundtrack is actually awesome and it fits the genre. I did spend a few minutes on the main menu, listening and enjoying the mood that it's set. However, the soundtrack is where the sweet goodness ends. Ah man, the voice acting. Well, see for yourself.
Could they be after me because of the human testing?
What do you mean?
You know, those prisoners, they'll do anything for a commuted sentence and a few years on our payroll. Anyone who agrees has to undergo a series of... No, I can't share that information with anyone.
Tell me about the test, Mrs. Vokes. Your life is in danger. We need your cooperation so the division can assess the situation and act accordingly.
The conversations are a touch generic at times and feel quite canned. The Endron guards are the worst for these kind of lines actually. The main character mostly does a good job at his lines, often carrying the rest of the characters in the interaction, but again, the voice lines and the facial animations don't lend themselves well to the immersion. You'll often have to sit through villain monologues while your character comes back with lines like, "You're paid for this," or "No, no." At one point during these conversations, I was honestly saying to myself, are we done now? Can I move on, please? I think the soundtrack does a great job of setting the mood, as I mentioned earlier, and while you're fighting, it really does amp you up. It's just such a shame that they only have a couple of songs on repeat, and after 10 hours, it gets fairly repetitive. I often opted for stealth just to avoid the repeated soundtracks, and this persists all the way till the end of the game, with occasional changes in the soundtrack for boss fights. I really think the voice acting department needed a little bit more work. I felt very disconnected from the characters themselves. Often during the major events that happen in the game, I felt no need to empathize with the characters, and I think that's a big rift that Cyanide need to overcome in the future to make sure that their players feel more immersed in the experience. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, Cyanide can improve on this in the future. How does it run? Well, this one's simple. It actually runs really well. I managed to maintain over 80 frames a second most of the time, even in the most taxing environments. The game also maintains over 100 on 2K and 1080p with a 3080. One thing that I should mention right now is post-processing adds this weird red and blue effect, which can be turned off by actually setting it to low. It's not really a compromise that we should have to make as consumers, and I'm sure there's a patch coming to resolve the issue in the future. Everything runs smoothly for the most part, with jankiness occasionally stemming from animation issues rather than performance issues. Textures can be somewhat blurry by default and take a split second to pop in sometimes, but it's hardly noticeable when moving around. It's mostly been present during cutscenes. Overall, good performance and optimizing. Hey, hope you enjoyed the review. I enjoyed making it as always. Thank you for everyone who's been supporting, liking, subscribing to the channel. It means so much to me, really. I hope to bring more reviews to you in the future. Going back to Werewolf though, Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood is on Xbox One, Xbox Series X, PS4 and 5 and PC. It had some really strong points, honestly, but it was let down by some voice acting, some bland level design and animation work. I was so looking forward to this game, so it does kind of hurt me to give this a red and amber light. And if you are new to the channel, on the next slide, I'll describe that light to you and what it means. So going forward, we're going to have some exciting games to review. Thank you for tuning in, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for watching for the first time. If you liked what you saw, like and subscribe. I have been Alex, this is the Bearded Breakdown. Thank you for watching again, and I'll see you on the next breakdown. Bye.